I've spent a few days test riding the 2018 Giant Anthem Pro Zero, and I currently own a Niner RKT9 RDO. And when I was doing some of my ride reviews, I did some comparisons with the RKT just to kind of give a point of reference. So in this video, I'm going to focus more on the comparisons between these two bikes. Now, if you're looking at getting a full-on cross-country race bike, and maybe these are the two you're looking at, then this video should help you. Or if you're looking at either one of these bikes and you just want a kind of a reference point to other bikes, again, this video should help you as well. So this is my Niner with a Shimano XT build and Fox suspension. And this is the bike that I've been test riding, the Anthem with a SRAM XX1. And I'm not really going to focus on the components. I want to focus more on the way the bikes ride, focus on the similarities and the differences. Now, just looking at these bikes, you can see the frame design is very similar. You've got the shock mounted inside the front triangle, and of course Niner uses the Cva suspension, which is somewhat similar to the Giant Maestro suspension in the fact that it uses chain torque to firm up the rear suspension a little bit. I like this kind, I call it VPP. I mean, it goes back to Santa Cruz. They kind of came up with this type of linkage, and then other companies modified it. But what it does, like I said, it uses your chain tension to firm up the rear end when it's time to climb hard or sprint hard. And I like that because when you stop pedaling, the suspension is pretty active. So again, just looking at the suspension design, they're pretty similar. The Giant has a lower sloping top tube, so the geometry, or I should say the center of gravity on this bike is a little bit lower compared to the Giant. But you really don't notice that much when you ride. To me, the biggest differences between these two bikes is the geometry, namely the head angle, and also the way the suspension feels. Both of these bikes are designed with pretty short chainstays. So the Niner has a 17.3 inch chainstay and the Anthem has a 17.2 inch chainstay. So not very much difference there in terms of the chainstay. What is different is the head angle. The head angle on the Giant Anthem is 69 degrees, and on the Niner, it's 71 degrees. Now let me explain what a steeper head angle can do. It makes the bike more agile at slower speeds. It's easier to get the bike around corners. You can kind of cut into the angle of a corner quicker. Also, when you're climbing steep climbs, it gives you a little bit more control over the front end. The front end doesn't kind of wander or flop around. Slacker head angle bikes, and this is an exaggeration because it doesn't really apply to this, but when you get on a trail bike, for example, with a slack head angle, it feels like the front end just kind of flops around at slow speeds. But the advantage of a slacker head angle, like the 69 degree head angle on the Anthem, is the fact that the bike is just more stable when you're going fast. On a steep head angle, when you're cornering or going downhill, the bike can feel a little bit more twitchy. Sometimes your handlebars can write checks that your tires can't cash with a steep head angle. In other words, it's so easy to start a corner that sometimes the effort is just a little bit too easy, and you just won't have the traction to match the ease of steering. Now that's a little bit of an exaggeration, but I think it kind of drills the point home. And because of that, I think you just have to be a little bit more attentive to that. You have to make sure you're not throwing the bars too hard into a corner. So I would say that riding a bike with steeper geometry takes a tad bit more skill. You can be a little bit more lazy on a bike like this with a little bit slacker head angle. Now this bike is still extremely agile, and if you go back and watch my reviews of this bike, I say a couple times that the beauty of this bike is it's agile but still stable. Not that the Niner is just a crazy twitchy bike. And I actually, when I got my hands on this Anthem to test ride, I actually thought I might prefer the Anthem. In reality, I actually prefer the Niner, and here's why. First of all, let's talk about the suspension, because that's another reason I like the Niner a tad better. I mean, I could honestly, if I didn't have either one of these bikes and it was time to purchase one, it would really come down to the relationship that I have with my local bike shop. I could flip a coin. Both of these are good bikes. But the suspension on the Niner it feels a little bit more linear. So the suspension on the Giant feels really plush in the very beginning of its travel. So when you hit small bumps, this suspension is very, very compliant. Where the Niner to me has a little bit of an advantage is it just feels more linear in the mid-stroke. Now I could probably, I don't know if this shock has a volume spacer, but if it did, I would take it out and that would help the mid-stroke feel of the rear shock. But on this shock, it actually feels like the Niner, even though both of these bikes have 90 millimeters of travel, it feels like the Niner has about 10 to 20 more millimeters of travel than the Giant. It just feels like the Giant Anthem ramps up pretty quickly in its travel. So that's one thing that I like about the Niner, just the way the suspension feels. It just feels like the bike is a tad smoother. Now part of that may be the Stans Valor wheels. Both of these bikes have carbon wheels, but the Stans Valors have a little bit of give to them, and it makes the bike just feel a little bit more smoother over the smaller stuff. But to me, the suspension just feels smoother. Now I did mention the fact that the Anthem does have a lockout, a remote lockout that only gives you 2 positions. I mentioned in the video that I actually prefer a suspension design that only has, or that does not have the remote lockout, and that you can tune this. So like for example, the front, you can go fully open, let me focus there, fully open, kind of a pro pedal, middle setting, and then locked out. And it just gives you a tad bit more tunability. Same thing with the rear. Also on the Niner, because my trails are very tight, I feel like I mentioned before, you can cut into a corner a little bit quicker on the Niner, and I prefer that. And the nice thing about the Niner is, you know, this is a 100 millimeter travel fork. You could also get a 120 for this bike. In fact, the newer ones do come with a 120. So I don't know if you could order one from Niner with a 100. You probably could, but it's nice to have that option. So if you want a more quick handling bike for riding trails that are just more tight, more twisty, then you would go with a 100 millimeter fork. If you ride more wide open trails, faster descents, flowy trails, then you would get the 120. Now you could also do that with the Anthem, of course. I mean, you could put a 120 on this bike, but it's already got a 69-degree head angle, so then you're going probably to 68 degrees, and that gets a little bit slack for cross country. So it's just nice that you have that option on the Niner. So I did some cross country laps on both of these bikes on different days, and I did 2 sections. The first section was a little under 14 minutes long, and the second one was a little under 13 minutes. And I was about 3 seconds faster on the Niner versus the Anthem. You know, that's not a very big difference. So both of these bikes are designed for racing. They're both very, very fast. You cannot go wrong with either one. Like I said, a lot of it comes down to what you have access to, you know, your relationship with your shop, how you feel about the company. You know, Niner's a very accessible company to me. That's one reason I like riding their bikes. But you know, both of these bikes are great. You cannot go wrong with either one. So I hope this video was helpful for you if you're looking at either one of these bikes or both. So as always, any questions or comments that you may have about these bikes, I'll try to get to them. If not, maybe someone else who has ridden these bikes can put a reply to those comments. So go ahead and drop those below. Thanks for watching.